Welcome back to Laying Down the Law here on 1250 ESPN San Antonio and now on 94.5 FM. I am James Pledger, sitting in for Steve Foster along with Paul Greco and Rod Chico Harris. It is my pleasure to introduce John Harris of the Houston Texans. You hear him every Sunday during the football season on the sidelines, reporting on the game, and also, if you listen during the week, to Texans Radio, the Bill O'Brien Show, and others. John Harris, welcome to Laying Down the Law on 1250 ESPN San Antonio.
Good morning, guys. How you doing?
We're doing really good, John. How about yourself?
Well, it's always an interesting day because you look up and you get so excited about the Super Bowl, then you realize this is the last football we're going to see until August. And that really kind of stinks, to be honest with you. And I know you guys got the Spurs, we got the Rockets here in Houston, and that should be fun down the stretch, but it's just not football. So it is a little frustrating, the fact that it's a great day for the Super Bowl, but then no football for 4 or 5 months, and that's pretty frustrating.
Yeah, there's no football, but there's tons to talk about in the football realm post this game, and you and the Houston Texans do a great job of covering all that, and it started at the Senior Bowl a couple weeks ago as you were down in Mobile, Alabama, and y'all got to break down kind of a lot of the players that possibly the Texans might be looking at in this coming draft.
Yeah, the Senior Bowl is always it's a good week. Unfortunately, there were some seniors that I think a lot of scouts and personnel people really wanted to see down there that weren't there. I think a great example of that was UCLA linebacker Eric Kendricks. And I thought it was interesting, before the Senior Bowl started, as the Senior Bowl starting, the very first event is the weigh-in. Phil Savage, former GM in the NFL with the Cleveland Browns, is the director of the Senior Bowl. And he stood up, and this is the first time I can remember where he stood up and he said, look, these guys, and he gave a list he put them in like 3 different buckets. He said, these guys handle their business, told us they weren't going to come, handle us professionally. These guys were injured, contacted us, said they weren't going to be able to make it because of injury. These guys you need to probe a little further and ask more questions about because these guys did not handle their business well. I thought it was pretty interesting that Phil sort of called out some of those guys. And unfortunately, Eric Kendricks, the linebacker from UCLA, one of the guys I love, was in that final bucket. I thought it was interesting how Phil did that, but it was a good week on a lot of different levels, and we were able to talk to a lot of different players. And, of course, the Texans sitting at 16 have a lot of different ways that they can go. And I think free agency may affect what they do if they're not able to re-sign Kareem Jackson or bring back Kendrick Lewis. And I think secondary becomes a very real possibility, number 16. But I know Rick Smith, and Rick Smith has loved to trade down in that spot. He's done it before. He did in 2008 when he traded from 18 down to 26 and then picked up Dwayne Brown. So I think the trade down possibility is also there for them. But it was a good week for the Texans, I thought, to get a look at some good seniors. And that's what Bill O'Brien likes. Leaders, guys that played 4 years, guys that have been around, fought through some adversity, but have the opportunity to show some versatility in what they can bring to the Texans.
We're speaking to John Harris, Houston Texans sideline reporter. And, John, you brought up the fact, of the buckets that Savage was putting players into, and you start to talk about the character of these young men that are about to become millionaires in the NFL. Can you talk a little bit about how character comes into play for the Houston Texans on draft day when you guys are trying to decide which way you're going to go on certain players? You alluded to the fact that Bill O'Brien likes the 4-year guys, the guys that are leaders that had a little bit of adversity. But with almost all players, you have that little slight character issues with these young men that are about to make probably one of either the biggest decision of their lives or about to get put into a situation where they're going to have to make big decisions. How do the Houston Texans handle character issues like that?
Well, it's interesting to bring up because that is one of the things that people have talked about in Houston for a long time, is that if a player has any sort of past history at all, in any way, shape, or form, then they're off the board. And I don't know if that's 100% across the board, but we've seen players that the Texans could probably fit on field perspective, but off the field they have not been willing to bend at all on character issues. And when Bill O'Brien was brought in, look, Bill's all about winning, but knowing Bill for as long as I have, I know that character is a massive issue to him because this is the way to look at it. If you have character issues off the field, then your on-field character is going to be impacted as well. And that's the most important thing to this team, is that if you're not going to do things off the field that you need to do, stay out of trouble, and do the things that they ask you to do. how can they trust you to do your things on the field? And I think that's where it lies, that if there are character issues, and you take Johnny Manziel, there's a lot written about Johnny off the field, a lot of things that Johnny got in trouble with. And I'm pretty sure that at some point the Texans looked up and said, not only is he not a guy that fits our system, but because of these issues, it made it a lot easier for them to look in a different direction at the number one pick as opposed to looking at Johnny Manziel. Had Johnny been Marcus Mariota off the field, I think it would have been a very difficult decision for them because they would have valued all those off-the-field intangibles that a guy like Marcus Mariota really has, that a guy like Jameis Winston doesn't or hasn't shown.
John Harris, Houston Texans sideline reporter. Remember, you can catch the Texans every week during the football season right here on ESPN San Antonio, as we're home for the Houston Texans. John, you look at some of those guys now at the Senior Bowl. I know you got to talk with Nate Orchard and a couple other players while you were down there. Who are some guys that really popped while you were down there? I know a couple of guys that I noticed looking at from the NFL Network. Danny Shelton, of course, showed up big. And guard out of Duke, Laken Thompson, somebody I really liked.
Yeah, Laken Thompson is the guy from Jamaica. He moved to the States. I think he was 11 or 12. And didn't know anything really about football, and got here to the United States, and they said, look, you can legally hit somebody and get all your anger out and frustration out. He said, okay, football's my sport. And then an incredibly intelligent guy went to Duke. You think, okay, he's at Duke, now what's going to happen? Well, Duke just happened to have the best run they've had in quite some time when Laken Tomlinson was a captain and player for that team. And Thompson had a really good week on the interior, could play guard. I think he probably could play tackle, too. But I think he's a ready-made guard that probably has late day 2, maybe early day 2 sights. And I think he had a really good week. I think there's a lot to like with Laken Tomlinson. You mentioned Danny Shelton. He had a great week, I think, against the run. I don't think I saw anybody one-on-one block him effectively unless it was Tomlinson. I think Tomlinson might have been the only guy one-on-one in run drills that could really stay on that block. Danny Shelton, as my buddy Drew Gordy said, was throwing guys around like throw pillows. But I thought Shelton had a good week from a run-stopping perspective. Jamison Crowder, also from Duke, slot wide receiver, can play outside as well. The versatility of being an inside-outside plus return game. I thought he had a tremendous week. But a guy that really popped off the page for me, and you look at his numbers and you think, okay, he's a home run hitter. He's a 9-route ready to go. Just down the field, throw it to him. That's Philip Dorsett from Miami. And I've seen him play a number of times, was not overwhelmed at all. He had a wonderful week. He ate up every single corner he faced, with probably the exception of Kevin White from TCU, who's about the only one that could stick with him a little bit. Other than that, Dorsett was dynamic, caught the ball in space, went deep, caught balls across the middle. I think Phil Dorsett made himself a lot of money from the University of Miami. And, Miami didn't have a great year, but the guys from the University of Miami, Denzel Perryman had a good week, Clive Walford, tight end, / H-back, had a great week. And Dorsett had a tremendous week. So I thought it was a really good week for the University of Miami, and yet you look up and that team was 6-7. So you sort of wonder what happened. You didn't even mention Duke Johnson, who is a junior eligible that has declared himself for the draft. So Miami had a lot of talent down there, and it really shone during Senior Bowl week.
And you talk about the slot receiver type guys, Jamison Crowder, Philip Dorsett, another guy, a guy that I really like out of Kansas State, does all those things. Tyler Lockett looked really good at points in the game and throughout the practices. And it seems like a slot receiver might be the way the Texans kind of want to go in the draft at some point, just to get some competition for Demaryius Johnson, who I know emerged a little bit this year, but Bill O'Brien does love to create competition on the field every day.
Yeah, it's interesting you made that, because in February of last year, the slot receiver position was one that Bill actually mentioned and said, we need to find a guy. We need to have a guy at this position. I think we're weak at this position. And then throughout OTAs and mini camps, training camp, etc., Mike Thomas, who was there, and then you had Keyshawn Martin, Alan Bonner got hurt, and that was the guy I think they really liked. They drafted in 2013. But I think Bill came around and said, okay, I think these guys have got a shot. And then throughout training camp, you realize, oh, boy, we're in trouble. Then they brought in Demaryius Johnson, and Demaryius has got the clicks, but doesn't catch the ball consistently. So I think you're absolutely right. It is going to be something to address, and I'm glad you mentioned Tyler Lockett, because Lockett had a tremendous week. And I'm a huge fan of Lockett because of the return game as well. And that's also something that the Texans have got to have. They've got to have something in the return game they really haven't done anything with the return game the last couple of years since Jacoby Jones left for Baltimore. So a guy like Tyler Lockett, a guy like Jameson Crowder, I think definitely have to be on the radar screen because of the return abilities. And if Philip Dorsett, even if it's just kickoff returns, I mean, the guy runs, in the 4.2s, and that's legitimate. And he's going to go to the combine, and he is going to blow it out of the water in the 40-yard dash. And that's when I think Philip Dorsett will be on everybody's radar screen. But the Senior Bowl really helped. But between Lockett and Dorsett and Crowder, there are options there for the Houston Texans at slot receiver. And depending on what happens with Andre, I would imagine Andre comes back. And if he has another solid year, you got DeAndre who's emerging as a star. If you add that dynamic third spot, that slot receiver spot in this offense, there's no telling what they're going to be able to do in the future.
We're speaking with John Harris. He is a Houston Texans sideline reporter. And, John, kind of step away from the draft. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made on behalf of the Houston Texans. And right now going into this offseason, you're talking about just under $10 million in cap space. You got J.J. Watt obviously making $22 million. You got a couple guys making $12.5. And there's some rumors about the possibility of Jonathan Joseph, who's making $12.5 million. Andre Johnson's owed $30 million over the next 2 years. How do the Texans handle this offseason knowing that there's a lot of holes to fill and you have two guys that possibly, if you cut them, you're able to save a ton of money and maybe use it towards maybe younger guys that can fill maybe bigger needs?
Well, you bring up a great point and something that we've talked a lot about here on the air and off. And you bring up a number of guys. I think the priorities are definitely there. They've got to handle some of their own first. They got to, what do they do with Derek Newton at right tackle, who I thought had a much better year in 2014 than the 2 years prior. Kareem Jackson, a huge priority for them in secondary. But I think there are some other corners out there that hopefully will drive the market down a little bit for Kareem so that the Texans can capitalize and bring him back. Kendrick Lewis signed a one-year deal, and he was the leader of the secondary. I would love to see him come back. You don't have to break the bank for Kendrick, and I don't think you have to break the bank for Derek. You are going to have to throw some money at Kareem, but then you're going to have a really expensive secondary. So what do you do with Jonathan Joseph? You ask him to take a pay cut. Those are all questions that Rick and Bill are going to have to answer, and I think they've thought this through. And then they also have got to make a priority out of the quarterback, Ryan Mallett. I know they like him. I'd like to see them bring him back because I don't think they've got to pay an exorbitant amount of money to do that. I don't think there'll be huge players in free agency, but I do think the roster will undergo some cosmetic change, and I hope they don't lose a guy like Kareem because how versatile he is, or Derek, or Kendrick Lewis. Those are the guys I think they got to bring back, and then Ryan Mallett, quarterback, has got to be, I think, a huge priority for them. And even if it's just a 2-year deal to bring him back and then let him break the bank a couple years from now, he'll at least have 2 years to show what he can do, and hopefully at that point show the quarterback that he was at Arkansas his last 2 years. So there are a lot of questions the Texans got to handle, and there are going to have to be some veterans that may get their feelings hurt, but they've got to also see the bigger picture, and that is take a pay cut, be on this team, because this team is moving in the right direction. You want to be on it, or you want to go make some money elsewhere or test the market elsewhere? You probably want to stay here where you know the system. You can be a starter. You're just going to make less money. There's going to be a lot of ego in check over the next month or so to be able to see who's going to take pay cuts and who wants to move on and maybe go play somewhere else where they don't have, I think, as good a shot in the future of being a championship team like the Texans could be under Bill O'Brien. Yeah,
John, I'm with you. I don't think that they're really going to be a big player in free agency outside of their own guys, and I think guys like Joseph and maybe even Kareem could be casualties because of that, because look at the guys they brought in throughout the season and how well they played, the Jamal Rolls and the Morrises off practice squads and final cuts. I mean, they came in and they played extremely well in situations for the Texans this year.
Yeah, you're right about that. Now, here's where having Rick Smith in the building and having a few years with the organization can step up and say, okay, hold on, let's not get crazy here, because if you remember back in, I think it was 2010,
yep,
they let some corners walk, and they went young at the corner position, and they got roasted. Now, there are a lot of things that went into that, but they got roasted. They learned a lesson. They said, okay, Jonathan Joseph, come on. Kareem, we're going to let you make your mistakes. We're going to let you get in your second, third year and improve, and then you start a secondary change. So if they go completely young, then I think they keep at least one of Jonathan Joseph, Kareem Jackson, and I don't want to pick between either because I love both of them. They're great guys, great off the field. They're fun to be around, and they're great players. I don't want to pick between either, I would hope at some point, and Kareem and I talked about this, he wants to stay. He wants to be here, but he also understands it's a business, and you got to maximize your value, and that's something that he definitely has to do. And all free agents have to do that. They get one shot at this. You maximize your value, and you go see what you got. You got one shot. You go make it worth it, and I hope the Texans definitely make it worth Kareem's time.
John Harris with the Houston Texans sideline reporter and HoustonTexans.com. Before I get you out of here, tonight's game, who you got and why?
I'm going to go Seattle. And there's just something about the run game. I think New England's going to struggle eventually with Seattle's run game. Now, the one aspect of the run game they could struggle with, the zone read, which the Seahawks didn't run much of against Green Bay early, which is surprising because Green Bay had trouble with that the first game. So I think Seattle may save that till second quarter, unleash a little bit more of the zone read, and then off the zone read, some run-pass options for Russell Wilson, I think could put the Patriots in a bind. I think the Patriots will play well. I think they'll keep it close, but I think in the end the Seahawks, with the versatility offensively, I think that's going to give the New England front seven some trouble, and that's where they're going to win this game.
Texans telestrator coming back next season?
Oh, absolutely. As long as I can get Bill O'Brien back on board, which is not always the easiest thing in the world to convince him to do anything. But I think he enjoyed being in the spotlight, being on television, so I think that'll be an easy sell.
By far the coolest thing I'd seen in a long time. Houston Texans sideline reporter John Harris joining us here on 1250 ESPN San Antonio. Don't forget, ESPN San Antonio is your home for the Houston Texans. You can catch them all football season long right here on ESPN San Antonio. John, thanks for the time.
Guys, appreciate it. Y'all have a good day.
Same to you. John Harris of the Houston Texans joining us right here on ESPN San Antonio. When we come back, we're going to switch gears, talk a little NBA and the Spurs with Justin Finsterman of Sirius XM, national NBA analyst, coming up here on Laying Down the Law on 1250 ESPN San Antonio and now on 94.5 FM.